Blah, 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 blah. Why am I playing with my hair so much? Out of blah, blah, blah. Hi everyone, today we're going to be going over the basics of diabetes in general, but specifically type 1. I've decided to name these in chapters, so today will be chapter 1, and I guess let's get started. So diabetes in general, type 1 and type 2, can be characterized by the malfunctioning or the non-functioning of the pancreas, and it is classified as an autoimmune disorder. The pancreas is a glandular organ that produces beta cells that in turn produce insulin. Insulin stimulates the body to take glucose out of the bloodstream and use it as energy as well as to regulate your sugars. This glucose or sugar actually comes from carbohydrates that you eat, and so when you don't have any insulin in your body, those carbohydrates cannot be used for energy, are just completely not digested at all, and that is not good. For any of you out there that have ever looked into nutrition or a health nut or anything like that, you know that carbohydrates are a big part of what you're eating. The typical amount that you're supposed to eat is about like 50% of your diet. So if that doesn't tell you how important carbohydrates are to your functioning, like, it's crazy, honestly. Carbohydrates are one of the main sources of energy as well as one of the main sources of food for your brain, and so it is very important to eat carbohydrates, and when you aren't getting any, it can be very detrimental, if not actually deadly. So for type 1, the body actually produces absolutely no insulin because the beta cells that the pancreas contains are completely destroyed. They don't function at all. They might as well not exist in your body. So this is where it gets kind of sciencey and where there's a little bit less So this is where it gets kind of sciencey, and if it's hard to digest, don't worry, I'm gonna try to break it down, although I'm gonna be honest, I don't necessarily understand all this myself, and if I say any words wrong, there's one in particular that I do not know how to say. Just bear with me, I'm doing the best I can. So from what I understand, diabetes is a chromosomal disorder regarding the human leukocyte or leukocyte. Leukocyte sounds leukocyte. From what I understand, diabetes is a chromosomal disorder regarding the human leukocyte antigen on chromosome 6. If you have no idea what that means, it is okay. Basically, you are born with the possibility of getting type 1 diabetes if you have this certain, I guess, mutation on chromosome 6. I don't want to call it a mutation because I'm not 100% sure on how to word that, but basically if there is this antigen on chromosome 6, you can have the possibility of getting type 1 diabetes. When I say that you can have the possibility of getting type 1 diabetes, this is because, contrary to what some people think, diabetes is not something that you get when you're born. Type 1 is like type 2 in the way that it's not something you are just born with. Often the trigger for type 1 diabetes is actually a viral infection, and I find this really interesting because I didn't know this before. I kind of knew that it was triggered by diseases, but I wasn't sure why, like a specific illness had caused me to get triggered for diabetes. So basically you have T cells in your body, and those fight antigens when you have some kind of infection or illness, and sometimes the beta cells will actually have the same antigens as the harmful virus, and they can be mistaken for strains of that virus instead of as beta cells that are necessary for your body. For me, that was really interesting to learn because about a month and a half before I was diagnosed, I actually had a viral infection. I had the flu, and it was a pretty bad flu, but it wasn't like, I mean, I've had so many flus and viral infections before. I didn't understand why that would trigger my diabetes. And even though I knew that that was likely the cause, according to like my doctors and everything, I didn't know that, like, why that specific illness had caused this when I had gotten ill so many times before. So when I was researching, and I figured out that it's because certain viruses have the same antigens as your beta cells. Like, I just think it's really interesting because if I hadn't gotten like that one particular flu, there's a possibility like I wouldn't have been diagnosed at that time, or I could have gone longer without it. I mean, it's pretty likely I would have gotten type 1 diabetes at some point, but I just think it's interesting that for so many years, for 17 years, I had so many illnesses and flus. I was never a healthy child. Like, I got sick a lot, but none of those had triggered diabetes because they just, like, my T cells knew that there was a difference between the antigens and the beta cells, whereas this particular time they didn't. All of that information came from a website called Vertical Health Endocrinology, if you're wondering. I looked into it a lot. I think it's a pretty valid website, but it is one of the ones that is not connected to an organization. So again, just be careful with anything I say. I'm not a doctor and I'm not certified. As I said, you aren't born with type 1 diabetes, which is actually a pretty common misconception. You get it like after you're born. Most people I know were diagnosed before the age of 10. I know one or two other girls that I've got in contact with that were diagnosed around the time I was diagnosed. I was diagnosed at 17. However, you can get diagnosed up to the age of 40. Now, cases of that are few and far between, but almost every single case has been before the age of 40. Because it tends to happen for younger children, it is known as juvenile diabetes, but there are people that can be diagnosed past the age of 20. However, like I said, it is more common to be diagnosed at a young age, and there's very, very few cases of people that are diagnosed past the age of 40. I actually looked into it a lot, and what I could find from several different sources was that the mean age is 14 years old as when people get diagnosed, and that most people get diagnosed between the age of 10 and 15. This is according to JDRF, which is one of the main juvenile diabetes associations. They have a great website. We do a lot of work at the hospital that I go to with JDRF, and they are a great organization if you're looking for more information. According to the American Diabetes Association, 9.4% of Americans have either type 1 or type 2 diabetes. So out of our entire population of everyone in America, and keep in mind in America, about 9.4% have diabetes. Now, this is including type 1 and type 2, and I mean, I guess that's kind of a large number of people, but when you break down the amount that have type 1, it's shocking. At least to me. I mean, I don't know, maybe it's not shocking. What? So, out of that 9.4% of Americans with type 1 or type 2, 90 to 95% have type 2. That leaves 5 to 10% of that 9.4 with type 1. So as you can see, it's not very common. It's not like everybody who's walking around has this possibility. So that's all I have for today. Again, this was just the basics, and next week I'm hoping to go into the difference between type 1 and type 2, because I know for a lot of people that's very difficult to understand. I totally understand if you don't know the difference. I didn't really know the difference until I was diagnosed. The only reason I even knew that type 1 was considered juvenile was because of those little like Disney, like not commercials, but where they would like go into different people's lives, and they went into Nick Jonas's right when he was diagnosed. I think he was diagnosed around the age of 14, 15. They had this little video of Nick Jonas talking about type 1 diabetes, and I just remember feeling like so bad for him and being so surprised that a celebrity had this kind of like huge diagnosis, and thinking, wow, I'm glad that's not me. Little did I know, right, that years later it would be me. But I mean, that's the only reason I even knew that type 1 and type 2 were different. Just so you guys know, I'm planning on trying to do videos every Sunday and Wednesday. I'm not 100% on that schedule because I'm a college student and I'm very busy. Like, my schedule is pretty much packed, but I'm gonna try my best to do it on those 2 days. Thank you so much if you watched to the end. I hope you guys have an amazing day. I'll talk to you later.